And I want to emphasize that that's not the place we go first.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I'm trying to solve the problem, I need to understand the problem first. You can't solve a problem you don't understand, but we do that
Yeah.
all the time. It's like, oh, you're upset, let me fix it. But what's going on there? And as you know, like when you're upset about something, there's a lot of aspects to that. And it goes deeper and it talks about our whole history in the relationship and all these things. So the first step is let's explore the problem. We are going to talk about the problem without any intent to solve it. Whatever the problem is, we want to talk about whether we're going to move or not. You want to move and I don't want to move. Okay, we need to sit down and have a conversation, which is not going to end in us deciding to move or not. We're going to spend however long we need to talk about and just let me understand what your concerns are. Why do you want to move? Why do you hate staying here? What do you need in a new house? All the things that you feel about this. And then you have to ask me, like, well, what do I want to do? Why do I want to stay? Why do I not want to go? What am I, how do I feel about it? Am I worried? Am I afraid? Whatever it's going to be. We explore the whole terrain.
So you have an amazing book, the Couple's Handbook. Is that correct? Is that correct?
Couple communication handbook. Yeah.
There we go. And I read the first 2 chapters, and I have to say, I absolutely loved it. It was wonderful. It was engaging. And you talk about how small disagreements can quickly escalate. So, what are those common communication pitfalls that really create those unnecessary arguments?
I think it's there's a lot of these little things that we say and do that trigger arguments and fights, but it's often largely it starts with a mindset, which is that I have to be right here, or I have to find the problem, make the problem go away. And if we disagree about the problem, then we're gonna argue about that. And if
Mm-hmm.
you point a finger at me, like we were talking about, I'm gonna push back. And if the mindset instead is, you know what, let's understand this problem. You know, most people are married to another human being with a brain in their head who sees things and feels things, and they have a perspective that actually usually makes sense if you get to know it. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I was dead sure that I was right, and there was no way my wife is going to be able to explain this one away. And then afterwards, when I took the time to hear her out, I said, you know what? That actually makes sense. So if you come at it from a mindset of, let me understand what's going on, we get out of a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the fights and arguments, even without necessarily tinkering with the way we say it, although that can help a lot. But
Right.
this book is not just about techniques of what to say to make the problem go away. You really have to do a little work to change where you're coming from.
So, um, this is someone who I am. I'm that person in the relationship when I'm upset. I want to talk about it right now. I want to get it off my chest, and I'm learning that I have to control myself. You call it the talk about it later principle. In the heat of the moment, share with us why that's a bad idea.
But it's very hard, and I totally understand that
Mm-hmm.
impulse to deal with it right now. The problem
Mm-hmm.
is when you're really worked up about the problem, you can't do it well. The book talks all about the ways you can do a conversation well and how to communicate. And we just said, come from a help me understand perspective. But if you're all worked up because your partner just did whatever thing they do that drives you crazy, you're really not in the mood to help me understand. And you're not in the mood to say it well. You're in the mood to trash them and like clobber them over the head with your words.
Right.
And you want to fix the problem and make it go away. And you don't want to hear why they think it's different from what you think it is. So you can't
Mm-hmm.
possibly make it better. Um, Even people who succeed at that, usually they get through the rough part first, then they'll say, well, then we calm down and we work it out. Okay, but you took the relationship through a heck of a beating on the way there. And it can be really hard to stop and walk away and come back later, but it's really a lot more effective in getting the relationship to work well and to feel like a safe, comfortable place than just barreling ahead with your feelings because they feel urgent.
I once had a counselor recommend that when you have to walk away, that you say, okay, I'm feeling a little flooded. I'm a little overwhelmed. I need a break. I'm going to take a walk. And she always recommended having a time frame, never more than 24 hours, but I will come back in 30 minutes, or I need to really kind of sit for a couple of hours with this. Can we talk about it tomorrow morning? Do you also recommend that?
Yep, that's exactly what I say in the book, is that it's good to say, hey, I'm going to be back in such and such time. Um, Often people find themselves needing to take a time out a little bit too late, and they're too worked up to say it well. So it's
Mm-hmm.
really helpful to have a plan beforehand. Hey, you know what, honey? If we need to take a time out, I'm going to walk out and I'll be back in an hour. That'll be our default. So having some kind of plan for when you're not in a place to even say that politely I don't know that I agree necessarily 24 hours maximum, only because there's real life. And if you happen to have multiple children and two jobs and whatever, so insisting that we get back to it in 24 hours may simply not be possible. I think it's an ideal to come back as soon as you are calm and ready. But there's life. And so for people who don't pull it off, you shouldn't feel bad. It's just, okay, I have things that I want to talk about with my wife that sit for days or sometimes weeks if they're not really urgent. And I know that we'll get to it. And being able to communicate well gives you this confidence that whatever comes up, we will talk about it. And that reinforces that you don't need to make it so urgent. You know what? This is bothering me, but I know that I'll have a time to talk about it. Don't need to do it right this instant.
Yeah, I actually really like that. And what I'm hearing is that the two of you have built trust. And so I tend towards the anxious attachment style. So when that person walks away, even though this is irrational, as soon as they leave the door, my thought process is they're never coming back because they're angry. But
Yeah.
if you build trust in that relationship, whether they have the ability in that moment to give you a timeline, you're going to trust that they're going to come back.
Yeah, and that builds over time, right? The first couple times
Yes.
are very, very difficult, but as you see the
Hmm.
person comes back, there's a part of you that says inside, "Oh, okay, I know they come back. That's my experience." If you don't have that experience yet, it's very difficult. And yeah, I mean, changing from being anxious and needy in a sense, that's hard.
Hmm.
It doesn't happen
Hmm.
overnight. It doesn't happen just because you say you want it to. There's experience, there's therapy, there's all kinds of things that you have to do to help yourself change the way you do things.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, it was because I felt abandoned as a child,
Yeah.
and my mom used silent treatment as punishment. And so I had to learn that this person is not my mother. They are a whole other person. While they may end up being someone who's not healthy for me, I have to give them the chance to show up and see how they interact with me.
Yeah, I mean, we all have, ghosts from our past, and
Yeah,
people who have been through things like you, it's just very difficult to make that relationship happen without interacting with that ghost. Being able to talk about it and communicate about that as well helps us. When we can talk about,
absolutely.
here's why I'm reacting the way I do, like, oh, I understand that. I don't like it, but I can understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, emotional regulation in relationships. There's a fight or flight mode that often hijacks our emotions in the heat of that moment. Are there any practical strategies just to recognize when we're escalating and maybe regulate it before we get too upset that we can't communicate effectively?
Yeah, emotional regulation is a whole separate topic, and many books have been written on that alone. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think for our purposes, when you're in a conversation with somebody, when you start to feel that edge, when you're no longer talking about oh what's going on or oh this or that, when you start feeling this push, I really need to make a point, that tightness inside, like that edgy feeling, that's an indication that we are going in the wrong direction. And really, as soon as you get there, that's a good time to take a break. You know what? I'm starting to feel a little bit pushy. Well, I'm going to take a break and come back to it. Like, we don't have to wait until we're yelling and screaming. Um, and yeah, then to be able to manage yourself in a helpful way, I tell people, go do whatever will help you calm down. If it's, yoga or run around the block or knitting or whatever does it for you to help you bring yourself back down. And again, there's a whole world of emotional regulation and self care that can be talked about. But definitely having some approaches for yourself that work for you to bring yourself back down in those timeout moments is important to be able to get back to the conversation.
In those situations where you're trying to have that space and your partner isn't, what would you recommend that they do?
Run faster. No, right. That's a common dynamic. So first of all, talking about it beforehand helps. Right? Hey, you know what? When things get too heated, I'm going to take a break. It's not because I don't want to talk to you. It's because I want to do this better. So in order to protect our relationship, I'm going to take a time out and walk away. Right? Having a plan together beforehand makes it easier. And then yeah, there some people are the followers, and it's hard for them to let go. So
Mm-hmm.
you tell them, look, I need some space. You go to a room, close the door. If they don't respect that, you lock the door. If they don't respect that, you get in the car and you drive away. Again,
Mm-hmm.
you do what you need to do to manage yourself well. It's not pleasant. It's not our ideal situation, but being
Right.
in the same room together, I mean, everybody who's been in an argument knows what it's like when things just keep going and escalating and it gets worse. And being there together is not going to make it better. So you need to take some space It's not our
Hmm.
best choice. It's not what it is the best choice. It's not what we want to do. It's not our ideal. Ideally, we'd be able to say, you know what, wait, let's calm down and just do this well. But nobody does that because we're humans.
Right.
So taking a break is the best choice you have.
And then you have that old sage advice of never go to bed
Never go
angry.
to bed angry. I want to make it clear.
And oh, I tried that and it doesn't always work.
Mm.
So, what would you share about that?
Right. I'm surprised that so many people still hold of that in like this high regard. It seems to me so impossible. And I don't know anybody who has said, no, that's what we do. We do it and it works great. And we're mad at each other and we just look into each other's eyes and we cuddle in bed and we talk about it and it feels better. Like, no, what actually happens is people yell and it gets worse and then it gets, really bad. And then maybe somewhere around 3 or 4 in the morning, they're exhausted and they come to some kind of, peace agreement or whatever. It's just not a better way to go. You can go
Hmm.
to bed angry and there's nothing wrong with it. It doesn't mean that the marriage is over because you went to bed angry. Everybody knows you're angry. It's not a surprise. It's okay. You don't be mean to each other. You're not gonna, curse at each other or smack each other, or also cold shoulder is not a great way to handle it. You roll over, you face the other direction, and the other person says, "Is everything okay?" "No, I'm mad at you." "Okay. Do you want to talk about it?" "No, I don't. We'll talk tomorrow." End of story. That's a reasonable and respectful interaction.
Hmm.
Being mad at each other is not a problem for the marriage. It is a normal part of a marriage to be mad at each other. And the question is, do you do it well or not? I can be mad at
Right.
you and be respectful and take my space, and then we'll come back and talk about it when we can do it well in a way that connects us and doesn't drive us apart.
Yeah. And this might be from my childhood, but my mom slept on the couch frequently s- for weeks, months,
Mm.
and they fought a lot. And so in my past relationships, even when we were angry, I really had an issue with if my partner didn't sleep in the same bed with me. It felt like that was the beginning of the end for me. What's your opinion on that?
Again, this is a great thing to talk about, right? The next day comes and everybody's a little
Hmm.
calmer, and you say, "Hey, you know what? When you sleep on the couch, it feels like the beginning of the end to me." Right? And
Hmm.
we go through the whole listening and empathy process that the book talks about, and we can get into further. And it's just another part of the conversation. I totally understand there are many things that to people feel like a big deal, and that could be a big deal for you. But just
Hmm.
because somebody is taking some space, it's not a catastrophe, right? If somebody feels they need to sleep in the other room, okay, it's different from being punished and exiled to another room. But if,
Yeah,
if your partner says, you know what, I need some more space, I can't sleep in the same bed with you, I'm really angry, great. That's a great way to handle being angry. Right? The alternative is what? Yelling and screaming? I don't know of an alternative where you just, you know what, I'll turn off the anger and I'll be okay now. That's not how human beings operate.
that's exactly. And you talked about the empathy process. Do you want to share some about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not enough just to say, well, I'm mad and that's the end of it. So there's a whole
Hmm.
process that we go through in detail in the book, which is like this. Um, first of all, like you said, we use I statements, right? If I'm talking to you, I want you to understand what my experience is. I'm not talking about you. I'm not saying what you did. Maybe I'll refer to that because that's what happened, but I'll say, when you did this, here's how I felt about it. I am the main character in my story, and I want to tell you my story, and I want you to understand it. And your job as a listener is to listen, to reflect back in your own words what I'm saying, to
Hmm.
validate, and to empathize. And that's not so hard to remember because the acronym is LOVE. It's the best acronym ever, right? Listen,
Right.
reflect in your own words, validate, and empathize. I fudged the O a bit, but it works. It's important. Your own words is
It
important,
works.
right? So you listen to me, and which means you're looking at me, you're putting down the phone, you're hearing what I say, and then you reflect back. Oh, so you feel like this, and this, right? Because it's one thing for you to understand what I said, but I have to know you that you understood what I said. So I want to hear
Hmm.
from you in your own words. Oh, this is the problem. Like, and I said, yeah, that's it. You got it. It's a relief for me that you understand why I'm upset. And then you validate and you say, oh, that makes sense. I can understand what, given that's your understanding, I totally understand why you're upset like that. That makes sense. And you empathize, which is to say, that stinks. I'm so sorry you feel that way. Like, I care that you are having this pain. It doesn't mean I agree with you. It doesn't mean I see the world the same way you do. But if you see the world the way you see it, if for you, when I go sleep in the other room, it is terrifying, I can understand that. And I'm really
Hmm.
sorry you have that experience. That doesn't mean I think it was wrong. That doesn't mean I'm not going to do it again. We can talk about how to handle it in the future. But it means that I really understand your experience and I care about it. And that makes for a good relationship. Helping them develop this skill where you can listen to each other, hear what the other person is saying, really get it, and really care about that. And then the solution comes much more easily. It's not like I have solutions for every problem my clients come to me with, but they can come up with solutions together, or at least work towards it, right? If one person
Mm-hmm.
wants to move and the other person doesn't, I don't necessarily know what the best way to do it is, but if they feel like they're working on the problem together instead of oppositionally, they have a good relationship.
But what advice would you share as far as communication early in that dating phase when you're kind of getting used to this person?
I mean, I think the same principles apply. Obviously, you are not necessarily bearing your soul on the first date. Like,
Right.
hello, I have abandonment issues. Nice to meet you. Right?
Yeah.
That may not be the way to start.
Right.
Um, but the mindset is the same, which is when they're talking about something, you try to get into their world. They say how they're really having a tough time at work, or a family issue or whatever. It's very easy to take that in from our perspective and think, well, what would I do in that situation? Or, oh, that shouldn't be a big deal. Like, why should this person care about their mom said this? But the way to understand somebody and connect with somebody is, well, let me understand why that bothers you. They said, oh, at Thanksgiving dinner last year, such and such was said. And like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
not really sure why that should bother you. So I can say, I'm not really clear why that's upsetting to you. Help me understand that part. And just trying to understand them helps us connect. I get into your world. I see what the world looks like from your perspective. Again, I may not necessarily be bearing my deepest feelings, and we
Mm-hmm.
may not be dealing with intense conflict with each other, but coming
Mm-hmm.
from a place of let me understand what the world looks like to you is a great way to move forward in a relationship.
Sometimes there's deep emotional triggers. So, for instance, I have CPTSD, and it will show up at very inopportune times. I just moved from Arizona to Colorado. It's been an immense amount of stress, and I've noticed my anxiety is up. I'm not
Sure.
dealing with normal stress as well as I normally do.
Yeah.
Let's say we have a couple, maybe they're going through something, or one of them is going through something, and there's high emotional triggers. What would you recommend each of those individuals do for the health of the relationship?
Right. So a couple of things. First of all, let's take it slow. Right. Everything that comes up doesn't need to be dealt with in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, right. Time out as needed.
Mm-hmm.
Second of all, giving a little slack. If your partner has CPTSD or whatever, whatever experiences or whatever illness or whatever condition, like you have to give some grace for that. You know, for example, let's take an extreme example. Somebody has Tourette's disorder and screams out in the middle of nowhere. Like,
Right.
there's no point in my yelling at you for that. Like, that's a thing you have. That's a thing that we have as part of this relationship, right? So your past trauma is a part of our relationship, and we have to deal with that together.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and third of all, talking about those triggers when they come up, or maybe not when they come up, but a little bit later to say, when you say that, that's really hard for me.
Mm-hmm.
And again, going through the dialogue process as needed. And emotional regulation, right? If you're under a lot of stress, you better be taking a lot of self care, right? Extra baths, extra
Yeah.
yoga. If we try to push ourselves, over again, at some point we crack. So, if a couple is moving and it's a stressful process, as it always is, let's be ready for that and make sure that there's food around, so we're not getting hangry, and make sure that we're getting enough sleep because that's going to make things worse. So taking care of yourself to the extent possible.
What would you say if you have someone who's they're in a couple, they're in a committed relationship, and their partner is consistently one-sided. They are really struggling with there isn't the active listening or the empathy process going on, and they really want to work that relationship out, but they're really having difficulties with that.
Yeah, I think there's a couple options, right? First is the DIY option, which is you pick up a book, my book, any book, my book,
Yes.
um, and you try to sort of use some of the principles there. Being empathic, you can do in one direction, even though it's not coming back to you. You can sort of model what you want, which is, what you're saying. This I hear that's bothering you, and do what you want to be done to you. A sensitive person will likely start to resonate with that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Odds are, if we're in the situation to begin with, you may not be with a person who is so sensitive to that. And so getting outside help is important, right? Calling up a coach or a therapist or whatever, and going as a couple and talking about the issue and working together on it. At the end of the day, if somebody says, no, this is your problem, I don't care, I don't want to figure, that's not a great sign. And I've definitely seen that. There's a problem in the marriage, and one spouse says, "Well, this is your problem. You go to therapy." If they're not willing to engage and work together on the relationship will probably remain one-sided. And then people have to sort of decide what they want. I mean, there are many good reasons for staying in a relationship that is not perfect, or that is not very good. There's a lot to figure out there. It's not as simple as like, okay, well, if you get the red flag, walk away. Yeah, there's work to be done.
There is. And some relationships are worth saving and some aren't. And do you have any guidance on when people are kind of on the fence? They don't know which side of that fence they're on.
Yeah, I find a magic 8 ball can be really helpful in those situations.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're lacking a magic 8 ball,
Yeah.
um, it's not an easy question to answer. There are so many
Mm-mm.
factors.
Yeah.
What are the pluses and minuses of the relationship? What are the barriers to leaving? Right. Of course, you have children together. It makes it much more difficult to consider leaving. Financial situations, family situations, all kinds of issues. I think that people need to think it through, and if they're not able to figure it out themselves, again, talk to a coach, talk to a counselor, where
Mm-hmm.
they can help reflect and be an objective third party and help you see. I've definitely worked with clients like that, and it's not my job to say, "Oh, you know what? Based on you
Right.
said this and this, yeah, you should leave." It's more like just reflecting back to people, and often getting that perspective can be very helpful. I've worked with a lot of people who have been in abusive situations, and just to kind of reflect back and say, "So you're telling me that your partner did this and this and this? Well, what would you call that?" And getting that sort of mirrored to a person often can help them come to their own clarity of like, you know what, that sounds like not a relationship that I would like to be in. Or maybe it sounds like something I could fix, or whatever it is. um, Getting a third party just to help you sort through it can be really helpful in figuring out, does this work, does it not work, what do I want to do? I think that a therapist who can be turned against one of the partners is not a great therapist. The
Correct.
job of a therapist is to be objective,
Mm-hmm.
and that doesn't mean that everything goes. I mean, I've definitely seen couples where one of them is abusive. One time I had to call a woman after the session and say, "Hey, I think you're in physical danger, and I think you need to do something to get yourself safe."
Mm-hmm.
But to have somebody in the session try to get me on their side, it's not about that. I mean,
Yeah.
just like I tell people in their own arguments, me as a therapist in the room, I'm not there to decide who's right and who's wrong. It doesn't matter to me.
Right.
I don't know what the facts of the story are. I'm not gonna know, and if I did know, it wouldn't matter. You guys have to live with each other. Nobody feels better when the therapist says, "Oh, you know what? He's right and she's wrong." Great, that's our session for today. That doesn't make the relationship better. What makes it better is you guys need to work on this together, and I'm going to give you the tools to do that. So having somebody try to point out how bad the other person is and why they're doing it wrong, it doesn't matter to me. I'm not there to decide who's right and wrong. I'm not the judge. I'm just the therapist. As part of the dialogue process, I think that often people think that we're communicating in order to solve the problem. And I want to emphasize that that's not the place we go first.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I'm trying to solve the problem, I need to understand the problem first. You can't solve a problem you don't understand, but we do that
Yeah.
all the time. It's like, "Oh, you're upset, let me fix it." But what's going on there? And as you know, like when you're upset about something, there's a lot of aspects to that. And it goes deeper, and it talks about our whole history in the relationship and all these things. So the first step is, let's explore the problem. We are going to talk about the problem without any intent to solve it. Whatever the problem is, we want to talk about whether we're going to move or not. You want to move and I don't want to move. Okay, we need to sit down and have a conversation, which is not going to end in us deciding to move or not. We're going to spend however long we need to talk about, and just let me understand what your concerns are. Why do you want to move? Why do you hate staying here? What do you need in a new house? All the things that you feel about this. And then you have to ask me, like, well, what do I want to do? Why do I want to stay? Why do I not want to go? What am I, how do I feel about it? Am I worried? Am I afraid? Whatever it's going to be, we explore the whole terrain. And then we can take a break, go for brunch, whatever it's going to be. You can continue to the next conversation about solving the problem right away if you're ready for it. But there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot we have to dig up and understand first. So first there's
Mm-hmm.
the exploration conversation, and then the resolution conversation. And when people try to rush to the resolution, you inevitably come to an answer that is not satisfying. Because if you don't understand that I am really attached to this house because this is the house that our kids were born in, or something like whatever it is, then when we say, okay, well, we'll get a house that looks the same. Well, that's not quite it, right? It's not that I need a colonial. It's just that this is the house. So if you don't understand it, any solution you propose even if I say I want to compromise, or well, okay, we haven't gotten to the depth of it. So spending the time to really understand and explore the problem is a really critical step before we get to solving it. And when you put that into the dialogue process, I think it goes a lot better for the relationship. The problem itself, it could be a tough problem. Like, I don't know, what are we going to do about moving? But as long as we're working together and you're hearing me and I'm hearing you, and you care about me and I care about you, we have a good relationship, even if we don't have a good solution.
Hmm. I love that. Absolutely. Because, yeah, um, I love the whole concept of you just talk about it. There isn't going to be a resolution because maybe that takes that edge out of it that I have to be right or I have to get a solution. We're just
Exactly right.
sharing. Pretend you're an
Yeah.
investigator getting information.
Yeah, and if you tell me you want to move and I really don't, if we take that off the table about whether we are or are not, I can really
Hmm.
listen to you. I don't have to sit there thinking of my defenses and my rebuttals. I can just hear you because I know if I say, you know what, I understand why you hate this house, you won't take that as, okay, we're going to move now. Because we're
Hmm.
just exploring the problem. And it really releases me to be able to truly hear you and get it and not try to force my own opinion back on you.
Yeah.